Hello everybody, once again, fellow YouTubers. This is my 7th posted game. This game I was playing again, an online Blitz game. I'm thinking of posting some of my correspondence games as I recently started playing those as well. Those hopefully will be a little bit less error-laden than some of these other ones. But here I was playing against a very strong player, a player that was rated more than 100 points higher than I was in terms of Blitz. I was playing the black pieces, and this is my first loss that I am posting. As the great Josh Waitzkin always says, he learns more from his losses than from his wins, so hopefully I'll be able to say the same after analyzing this game, and hopefully everybody else will also be able to learn some things from a loss of mine. So my opponent started off with e4, pretty typical opening move. I played c5, the Sicilian, which I have generally taken to playing lately. Sometimes I still play e5, but generally I play c5. Eventually I'm going to learn how to play the Caracana a little bit better, and maybe I'll start playing c6 a little bit more, but I still play c5 in general. Knight f3, knight c6, that's my typical response. d4. d4 is the open Sicilian, which I love playing as white. I don't mind playing it as black either. I think it suits my style. I'm kind of a tactical player. I love when things are open. I love when minor pieces are flying around the boards, and the board closed, cramped, pawn-heavy positions bother me a little bit. So I don't mind the open Sicilian, so I played c takes d4, knight takes d4, d6. Again, it looks like a little passive move, but one of the things that I always, you may notice if you've watched some of these games, the one thing that I always want to guard against in the Sicilian is I want to guard against e5. I obviously want to put my knight on f6, and if this spot isn't guarded, now it's protected by the knight, but eventually, let's say for example, if he moves his knight back here, or if he moves the bishop or a knight, something to defend this square, I really want to make sure that I have control of this e5 square. I really don't want that pawn getting here in a position where it can cause me some discomfort. He plays knight c3, developing his knight. I play knight f6. So basically, we both have our knights developed over here. There is a little bit of tension over here. These two knights are squaring off against each other. I don't mind that. Sometimes people would trade off the knights immediately. I'm perfectly happy to to let the knights to develop while the knights are squaring off against each other in the middle. I think his knight is actually not in quite the strongest square. I think the strongest square for this knight to be in is generally f3. So if it's in the middle of the board over here, I'm perfectly happy to let it sit there until he decides to trade it off. He plays bishop c4, aiming at that weak f7 square, which of course I certainly have to worry about. Eventually I definitely want a castle. Kingside, you don't want to castle queenside with this file open over here and a little bit of a pawn weakness over here. So I played g6. I'm going to fianchetto my bishop. Again, whenever I play the Sicilian, I very often end up fianchettoing my bishop simply because these pawns very often box in my dark squared bishop over here. And I want to leave this pawn over here so that whenever he plays bishop to g5, at least this knight isn't pinned against the queen. He castles, again, just a solid developing move. I play bishop g7. He trades off the knights. Knight takes c6, get a little bit open space in the middle. He wants to control this open file. B takes c6, of course. He plays bishop e3, developing really the last of his minor pieces. I castled. I still have one minor piece yet to be developed. And then he plays queen d2. Which really you'll see this is going to be the thing that gives him his first major advantage of the game, is that he wants to make sure that he has control of this file. This pawn over here, it doesn't look that weak as of right now because it's protected by the d pawn. It's protected by the e pawn. But he wants to double up with his queen and rook, get a battery on this file, aim at this pawn in the middle. He wants to take control of the open file. So now I have, pretty much a free move, nothing major that has to be done this move. And I, obviously, when you have still an undeveloped piece, you want to try to develop that. So I needed to develop my light squared bishop, and I made what I think was probably my first mistake of the game, and a mistake that eventually hurt me in positioning. I played bishop g4. Again, I very often play that when there's a knight over here. Here there's knight over here, and there's no knight over there, so I'm not really threatening anything inherently. But I want to try to hit at this square so that he can't double up with the rooks on this file. And in general, where else really can I bring it? I can bring it to here. I can bring it to D7, or I can bring it to B7. The problem with B7, and very often I used to do that all the time. I used to fianchetto both bishops all the time. I've stopped doing it just because of the fact that I find that a fianchettoed light squared bishop over here as black has a very, very difficult time coming to the defense of the king. If he ever is going to launch a major attack on the king side, now you can see at this point my king looks pretty safe over here, and it's castled fianchettoed bishop with the knight over here, but the board could open up. He could eventually play e4 and e5 and try to blast open the center and have a little bit of an attack on the king. And if that happens, and this bishop is way over here on b7, it's not going to be that easy for it to come to my defense if it needs to. So the other alternative, of course, would be to play bishop e7, which probably is what I should have done, because what happened is I ended up losing a tempo, because he played h3, and now, really, what can I do? But I can't go back here, obviously. I can't go back to h5, because then he just plays g4, and the bishop is trapped. Actually, it might not be the end of the world, because I would trade off the knight, then I would take it with the knight, he would take, I would take, and I would lose a bishop for 2 pawns, but, it would open up and expose his king a little bit. But, I didn't, if I put the bishop over here, the other thing that I'm worried about is rather than playing g4 immediately, he really has the option to play g4 whenever he wants. This pawn isn't going anywhere. Obviously, this pawn can't move to g5 because both the queen and his bishop are zeroing in on this square. So this pawn's got to stay here, and this bishop back here is really in pretty much an impossible spot. So I have to move back to bishop d7. Now again, putting my bishop on d7 originally might have been what I wanted to do before anyway, but having moved it out to g4 and then back to d7, I've blown a tempo, and I've basically wasted a move. So now he plays f4. He wants to take advantage and try to tear open the center. I played queen c8. A few reasons. Number one, I realized the rook eventually is coming to this file, and I don't want the rook to be on the same file as my queen. Number two, and this is something, I have another game where it worked when I did this, I'll show you that another time. When he has a castled king, and he has a pawn on h3, or if it's a black, if it's black, the pawn on h6 with a castled king. I very often like to think about the possibility of sacrificing the bishop for the 2 pawns. In other words, bishop takes h3 in this case, pawn take h3, queen take h3, and I've lost a bishop for 2 pawns, but I've blown open his king side, and maybe I can launch an attack. So I like to think about that. So, I've doubled up the queen bishop battery on this diagonal. I've gotten the queen out of this file, which I know his rook is headed to eventually. And I've set up that possibility. So that's what I played. Now he tries to tear open the middle. He plays e5. Now, in retrospect, what I probably should have done is just taken the pawn right away. Remember, this bishop is not hanging. It's protected by the queen. It's attacked by the queen also. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of taking this bishop, because remember earlier in the game I lamented the fact that when he has if he has this strong pawn over here on e4 and e5, he has a strong pawn on e5 that is going to give me a lot of trouble. But so I didn't want to take it, so what I did was instead I dropped my knight back to e8, hoping that if he does take it, for example, if he takes this pawn over here on d6, I can just take it with my knight, and then I think I'm in a good position, because this knight is protected by the pawn. This d8 pawn may eventually be a little bit of a weakness, but that can be protected by the rook, that can be protected by the queen. I've got a good placed knight that's threatening this bishop, that's protecting this pawn. I think that would be good for me overall. But I didn't really foresee the next couple of moves, and that is he plays rook a to d1. I don't know why I didn't see that. I was assuming that he was going to break the he was going to double up on that file. So now, as you can see, I started to think, and I started to look at this, and I'm in a little bit of trouble over here. It looks like I'm going to drop a pawn, because if you think about it, if it's his move, obviously this pawn is hanging. He can take, I retake, he takes it with the queen. Nothing I can do about that. This pawn is also pinned against the bishop, because now he's got a battery on this file, and this bishop is only protected once by the queen. if this knight weren't here, I'd be able to move this rook to e8, and I'd be able to protect the bishop in that way, but this knight is kind of blocking it up. Moving the knight back here to e8 is not always the worst move in the world. Sometimes that can be a good move. It opens up this diagonal for the bishop. It allows the knight a little bit of greater flexibility. It can come to